us or not? Former Congressman Alan West joins us. Nice to see you, sir.
It's always a pleasure, Greta. How are you doing tonight?
I'm very well, and I guess it's a two-part question. Number one is, did they mislead us? And number two, whether you think, if in fact you think they misled us, that it was intentional rather than accidental or even uninformed.
Well, I think that what you just witnessed was a very horrible kabuki dance being done by Jay Carney, and without a doubt they did mislead the American people, and they continue to attempt to try to mislead the American people through a leadership by fear-mongering and intimidation, when we know that this whole thing about sequestration is just about a 3% cut on the actual growth of government. But Janet Napolitano and Jay Carney should listen to this. Climate change musical expenditure, $697,177. Funding for robotic squirrel studies, $325,000. $947,000 for funding of a Mars menu out of NASA. $1.6 million spent on NASA video games. And we also know about this study of obese lesbian alcoholism. So, you know, I don't know what they're talking about as far as this whole thing about furloughing. The only people that are really being severely affected are veterans and people in the military, which should be the #1 priority for our federal government, is to provide for the common defense.
All right, well, what would be the motive to intentionally do it, if indeed it were intentional? I mean, I've gone through the list, and you've got Eric Holder said that there were going to be full furloughs of Bureau prison staff. That didn't happen, or is not going to happen. You've got Jan Napolitano, Secretary Napolitano on the border. You've got Education Secretary Duncan saying things about education that at least hasn't happened. Everyone doesn't think it's going to happen. You've got issues about airport delays and stuff. You know, what would be the point, if it's intentional, to do it intentionally because they know they would get caught? It's not going to happen. Is it that there are no consequences?
Well, first of all, let's be very clear. The only people that are doing this and quote-unquote catching them at this is this news station that we're talking on right now. You're not going to hear this on any other mainstream media outlets or some of the other cable news outlets. This is all about continuing to spend the American taxpayer dollar. And when you look at the fact that something I thought was an April Fool's joke, when the president comes out and says we're going to have National Financial Capability Month in April, well, this really is national take away from the American taxpayer more of their hard-earned capital to give it to Washington, D.C. to wastefully spend. Because we know what happens on the 15th of April, and if the American taxpayer is late, you're going to hear from the federal government. But yet, we still have not gotten a budget from the president and from the White House, and they're late since the 4th of February. So again, this is about responsibilities. This is about continuing to want to see this out-of-control spending that's coming out of Washington, D.C., the almost $7 trillion of debt that has been incurred since January of 2009, the continuation of these trillion-dollar-plus deficits, and what do we have? We're continuing to operate on a continuing resolution, not a budget proposal and a budget plan.
Well, what I don't get is this. I mean, we go through night after night. We go through a lot of waste. We go through a lot of fraud. We go through some programs I think most people think are sort of silly. If we're studying the sex life of a fly or something, I think a lot of people would think that shouldn't be public funds, even if there's a scientific reason for it. We can find private funds for it. But what I don't understand is that at some point we're going to implode. You can't keep spending more than you have. I mean, that is true, and you're going to implode. Do you believe that the president's administration just think that day will never come, or do you think that there's hoping that the economy gets so revved up that we're suddenly going to get flush with cash from revenue from tax receipts?
I think that they believe that the American people will not come to a realization that they will come. Look, our monetary policy is horrible. Everyone is complaining in Washington, D.C. about $85 of sequestration. We're printing about that much money per month to buy up our own treasury and mortgage-backed security debt. So that's almost a zero sum. Our monetary policy is horrible, and so we have an artificial economy. We have money that is circulating, and everyone keeps touting about Wall Street doing fine, but our small businesses are not. As a matter of fact, if you go to the American Action Forum, you will find out that the federal government just instituted $218 million of new regulations just in last week. So the message is not getting through to the White House or through the people in Washington, D.C. We are bankrupt in this country. We're bankrupt in the future for the next generation. And sooner or later, the bill payer is going to come. We see what happened in Cyprus. We've seen what's happened in Greece and what's happening through the Eurozone.
Well, I may be the only one who thinks it, but every time everyone says that the stock market is doing well, I always think to myself, yeah, the stock market is great for those who actually have money who can put it in the stock market, but a lot of Americans just simply don't